the Finance and Facilities Committee of the Waukesha Board of Education to order. I believe the meeting has been properly posted.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. Up to opportunities for citizens to speak. I see no one in the gallery, so we'll move on to action items. We have one action item this evening, approval of monthly vouchers. I will also mention that Mr. O'Brien and Mrs. Madden have been excused from the meeting tonight. Approval of monthly vouchers. Any questions?
There were no questions
There are no
submitted.
questions. Does anybody have any questions? So we're looking for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Como. Mrs. Reincheck moves. Mr. Como seconds. Any discussion?
No questions this month.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? 3-0 for approval. That would be the extent of our action items. We'll be moving on to information items now. The first one up is update on 2017-18 budget and tax levy.
Okay.
Alrighty.
We have probably half of the information we need to finalize the budget. We're still waiting for some final figures from DPI, but we do have the property tax valuations, and we have our student count. And I think one of the important things to note is that our student count went down more than we had expected it to. So our September FTE right now, this doesn't include the summer school, our FTE stood at 12,350. Now, if you compare that back, that's quite a significant drop from even 2 years ago in 2015 when we were at 12,705. And good news, the summer school enrollment has continued to increase, and so we gained some FTEs due to summer school to help offset that, but not as much as we need to totally counter it. With that, it brought a larger declining enrollment exemption and allowed for our revenue limit to go up a bit. So if you look at this document, the scenario document, the furthest left column is what we did last year, our 16-17 finalized numbers. The first scenario is what we presented back in August, and then scenario B and C, they include the new revenue limit. So with our increased declining enrollment exemption, our revenue limit now stands at $129,501,262. And scenario B includes the same amount of state aid that we were projecting in August. But everything looks like we're going to get some increased state aid, so that's what scenario E is. Scenario C. It includes what we think is a realistic amount for our state aid of a little over $50 million. And so what that ends up doing is bringing our tax rate, if this is the scenario we end up with, our tax rate goes to 8.25 versus $8.66 last year. So there's a little bit of a drop in the tax rate number. You know, the declining enrollment exemption is all well and good for now, but eventually it's going to come back and hurt us. So that's the one thing we have to keep in mind as we're moving forward, is eventually that's going to catch up with us because it's on a 3-year rolling average, and at some point we're going to be losing those higher numbers, and that exemption is going to decrease. Therefore, our revenue limit's going to decrease along with it. What we're looking to have today mainly is, we're not looking for approval because we don't have our final numbers. Hopefully we'll have everything by next Monday where we can start chugging away and coming up with the final budget that will be proposed. And we're proposing a meeting on October 23rd to have a budget hearing meeting to finalize the budget, similar to the process that was used last year.
All right, any questions? Mr. Como.
Yeah, Darren, I think you had a projection that you made of our enrollment and how that's going to catch up with us as we as we go forward in each year. Because we have declined now. How many years in a row have we declined?
At least 4 that I can, based off the sheets we have attached. In the fall of 13, we had, and this is full-time equivalents, September count, 13,009 students, and we're down to 12,350. So that's again, that's not how many kids we're serving, because some kids open and roll out, some kids open, there's other factors in terms of how many kids are being served in our buildings. But in terms of resident kids, we've lost, 700 kids in 4 years. The last enrollment projection we had averaged, I think it was about 120 kids lost every year over a 5-year period. Now, I look at those enrollment projections and say, over 5 years, we're gonna lose 500 kids. It doesn't always come in nice 120 segments, so hopefully we'll have flat or improve, since this year's, more than double what we had anticipated. The biggest, in terms of a grade, the biggest drop was 4K, and then 4K is also the hardest grade to guesstimate, because the kids aren't in our system yet. They're just showing up, and you don't really have a very good idea of how many 4-year-olds are out there. Especially if they're the oldest child in a family, you certainly don't have much data on them at all. So it's an issue, and I think it's an issue, and we're not alone in declining enrollment, but it's an issue for a lot of topics we're discussing in terms of facilities and capacity and those types of things.
How much larger was the drop for 4K than what we anticipated?
Oh, I'll have to email you. I don't remember that number off the top of my head. Just know it was less than last year. We knew last year we thought was a pretty good year, but you hope it was the norm. Wasn't the norm, apparently.
What is the norm is the question, right?
Yeah, you need 3 years to form an average.
Right.
Especially, last year was the first year we moved a lot of those programs back into our facilities, so other things were changing, so you really couldn't compare even that year prior. But I think next year will provide what the norm in 4K could be.
Yeah, I think it's going to be important that we try and stay on top of your predictions as best as we can, moving, years out. I think you did a 3-year.
It goes out 4, but
Okay.
I really focus in on 2 and 3 years. It gets hard to.
Sure.
You're going over a couple biennial budgets and several elections. It's hard to go too far.
But that at least helps us as a committee to wrap our head around, knowing that there will be a negative aspect to this.
Mm-hmm.
It will hit us at some point in time, because it'll impact our averages. So hopefully we'll turn the corner at some point in time, start moving up, but it'll just be moving up slower because of the 3-year average.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And it's counterintuitive, it's odd. I mean, you have to be a steadily declining district, where when you have a big drop like this in year 1 or this year, you actually have more revenue than if our enrollment would have been flat because of the exemptions. It's the second year where the fiscal impact begins to be felt. So in January, when we do our annual forecast, we'll spend some time specifically on this scenario and how it works, and without looking at gigantic spreadsheets and all that, because it's important for us to know what the impact is.
One thing I wanted to point out, the equalized value went up by 4.7% this year versus last year was 3.42. So that does help that mill rate to drop a little bit when the values go up.
Yeah, our revenue limit at best, I think, is going to stay flat over the next several years, and probably decline. And if aid even stays flat, your tax levy is going to be flat to a slight decline every year, but you're losing revenue authority. I mean, nothing's 100% good news, so I don't foresee a tax issue. But every biennial budget's an adventure, so.
yeah,
Yeah.
this, your average constituent will like this for this year. I mean, 41 cents per mill is a pretty, is it 41? Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong numbers. 28 more additional cents per mill, or less, 28 cents less per mill from what our original projection.
For the budget hearing, yeah.
Yeah. So Yeah, and we had, first I was taking the 2016, 2017 final too. That's what I did too, but that's, that's good news for now. And I would much rather see our property values moving up. I will never forget the first year when we had our first negative valuation come back. Holy cow. I mean, nobody ever
Plays with the
thought
rates.
that would happen. And then that became the norm for quite some time. So it's good news that our property values are moving back in the direction that they are, so.
Yeah, I think that speaks to a more global good that's going on out there. But also just to stress to anyone who might be listening, these are all estimates, and on Monday, we'll get the final numbers, so.
Anything can still change?
I can tell you it probably isn't any of these numbers right here,
right.
but it's in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Are we still, I just have one question. Are we still restricted by an open enrollment on the 4K? That's still, you can't open enroll into this district if you don't have 4K in your home district, correct? Yeah.
That's correct, but I don't know if there's anyone around us now that
Doesn't
doesn't
have it.
offer. McGuanago, I
did
think, was
Elmbrook?
the last one.
not sure about
Oh, Elmbrook maybe. still.
Elmbrook got rid of it, I know.
They had it and then they
Yeah.
added it and then they took it away. I'm
Right.
not sure where they're at. I know McGuanago added it a few years ago.
Okay, I do have one question. Thank you. When we had our Jaden, our first child, when she turned 5, or maybe she was about to turn 5, we got a letter in the mail that said your child is ready for kindergarten. How would they have known that if, so we had her at Waukesha Memorial, so I thought, well, maybe they just, take all the babies born that year, and then 5 years out, they send them a letter through the school district of Waukesha saying, you're gonna need to get them into kindergarten. So if that happened to me, then why couldn't we keep track of that for 4K?
I'm not sure how that process would work. I'm not saying that maybe that doesn't happen.
Okay.
Yeah, it does
That'd be
happen.
a
I
sig-
got the same letter for
Maybe
my
it's-
Somebody's
youngest.
keeping track.
Someone must have that list. I don't know.
That was for your firstborn? Oh, okay. Because I know they ask in subsequent years, if you have a child enrolled, they ask at enrollment if you have any younger
We get family
students
data.
coming up. But that wouldn't account for your firstborn.
Yeah, so when Darren said, if they don't have kids in our district, how would we know if they were having siblings come in at 4K? But they knew when we were just gonna be entering the school. So if you could get that number the year ahead, I thought it was the school district of Waukesha, but if,
I'll ask enrollment. I'm
I
not,
was going to put a note to, I can check with
and
enrollment.
that'd give you a somewhat of a picture, but a lot of kids move in and out over a 5-year period, and who's keeping the database on the addresses, and it would almost have to be the county. I don't know. But I can ask enrollment if that's a process that we are involved in at all.
Anything else? Alrighty, moving on to site improvement funding.
Our agenda was a little light. It's funny, we're getting ready to finalize the budget, and we're having the lightest agenda of the year, so. But this is a topic, I don't know, Joe, if you remember, when we toured Brookfield, they toured their facilities, they talked about how they had a pool of money, and principals could apply for projects to be completed in their schools. We have, I started that same process last year, and schools can apply. So this is simply just showing you, I think, a better practice that's going on that we've added. We didn't have a lot of fanfare that when we rolled it out, and quite honestly, I think some of the principals didn't believe we would follow through on it. But any principal, actually, I'll be sending out this Google Doc by the end of this week. They can apply for any improvement within reason. I state in the directions, don't ask for a 3-school or a 3-classroom addition to your building. We got $250,000 here, or $250,000 here for 25 sites. So, but we don't try to do everything at every school. We're not opposed to it, but we're looking for bigger, more impactful projects than a bunch of tiny ones everywhere. I guess I'd give example of Lowell's Library, Meadowbrook's Library this past year were 2 of the larger projects that we had did. So they apply, and then I have teaching and learning department sit down and go through them. They sign off on kind of their priority lists. Glenn and I then will look at them and make sure The projects they're approving fit in with maybe work he's doing. So we get two sets of eyes from two different departments. And then those projects move ahead and are completed over the summer. So I think this year we'll get a lot more applicants, but it's, one other thing they had, I think they called it the Special Projects Fund at the time, before I got here, and people would submit things and then they would never hear whether they were denied or approved, and it just kind of got lost in this Google Doc has on there also, on the date, we have a deadline that we have to approve them or disapprove them, that I go in and I'll put approved or denied, so everyone can see all of them that were approved, all of them that were denied, so it's completely transparent for any principal. So I thought I'd share that, and we're actually doing a lot of good things in the business office, so I'll try to throw things in either the Friday update, or if we have a light agenda, throw it on the agenda for you guys to get a better idea of what we're doing in the business office.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, I like this process. I appreciate you sharing it with us. The one thing I really liked about what you're doing is the transparent approach. You guys are transparent about virtually everything that we're doing, so I think everything we're doing, not virtually, but everything we're doing, and that is much appreciated. I think the other advantage to that is it gives principals an idea of what, has been approved. So these are the kinds of projects, so over time, you're probably going to start to have some good examples, and people will get a sense now of what this fund is really meant for. We also took this approach before we implemented all of our iPads into our schools. So we had schools say how and why they wanted to have iPads in their school. And it went through actually a pretty rigorous process. This won't be as rigorous as that, I don't think. But, schools really needed to show that they were prepared to have the iPads be rolled out at their school. And that was a really complex process. This one I don't think needs to be quite as complex. It's a little simpler. But, we have had success with that type of approach where we have schools applying, and I think this is really good. The one thing to keep in mind, we got the idea on the tour. You got the idea on the tour with at Elmbrook. I think they had a $600,000 budget, and they're half our size. So if we were to, if we were to equate that out, it'd be $1.2 million. So we're not quite there, but maybe over time we can expand this fund.
Yeah, I think this year I didn't look to expand it because you didn't know the outcome of the state budget. So you hated to roll or have a number out there and then, oh, wait, we won't be able to fund it. So it's something that I think can grow with some favorable moves. And one other thing this does is it insulates Glenn's maintenance budget, as I put in the executive summary. So often he'll be told to do a project or asked to do a curriculum project that we've not scheduled for, and it bumps the things that this committee sees. And those low-hanging fruit on that list get bumped back a year because we've now added whatever the latest curriculum project was. Not that Glenn's not doing some of those projects still, but it kind of puts a wall in between the two. Because I turn to T&L and I go, well, this is your pool of money. You prioritize what you want to do. So I think it serves a lot of purposes. And again, I think the quality of the submittals last year I was pleasantly surprised with. They actually did some legwork, met with Glenn if there was some construction involved, or our guys could do some of the work in-house and what that would cost. So it has gone pretty well.
Yeah, how we teach and the facilities that we teach in and how our students learn have really changed over time. I mean, we kind of get locked in our heads, right, as we get older. This is how I learned when I was a kid, and things have changed just so much, and that's what these funds are for, is to help try to facilitate those better learning environments. And so hopefully we can also get some good feedback as to how that worked out. So that would be one suggestion I have is how do you analyze what we've done? And if we could, have some sort of feedback, that would be great.
Yeah, we can, Jessica Wagner out at Meadowbrook sent you a video she
Yes.
made.
Yes. That was
And I know
impactful.
I know I can get Rachel to do something for her media center because that's really turned out very, very well.
That had a high impact on me, I know. Captured my attention.
I don't have a question, but I'm impressed. I'm impressed with you both. I was just writing down some words. You guys are proactive, detailed, thorough, as Joe said, transparent, very organized. These charts are always color-coded and in a way that we can follow along. You have great follow-through and communication, just as you were saying. If there's a project going on in a building, we're going to talk to Glenn and we're going to make sure, that there's good communication and it's going to happen at the right point. And it's just great leadership, so thank you. You said that the schools are surprised that you were going to follow through with this and that it was really going to happen. I feel like that's happening on multi-levels all over the board, so thank you.
Else, anything to add? Alrighty,
And bring you flowers, Darren.
then I have to.
I can
For
share.
that.
Right here.
Alrighty, moving on to our final information item, the monthly budget report.
Okay, nothing big. It's only September, so we're not into our high and heavy spending parts yet. Just some highlights I pulled out. For our local sources of revenue, of course, our biggest items in September were our book fees and things like that as far as generating the most revenue. It's a little bit down in September compared to last year, but that's because August was so much up this year. We did a lot more with more and more online enrollments. We're collecting earlier and earlier with people taking advantage of RevTrack. So it's not unexpected that it went down a little bit in September because of going up in August. For state sources, we did receive our first equalization aid payment of $7.4 million. So that's always good news to get those. Overall, our revenue is right about the same where it was last year, 5.93% collected versus 5.77, so all following and tracking. For expenditures, our biggest in September always is the salary and the benefits. Those are our number one expenditures through this time of year. And for salary, we're pretty close to last year, 12.4% versus 12.21%. Purchase services is coming in as our second largest category of spending, and when we look at the comparison at 14.5% this year versus 9.11, we have to keep in mind that in August we had some bigger expenditures for big projects like the Wolf paving and the Wi-Fi projects that we discussed last month. That puts our expenditures ahead of last year. So nothing unexpected there. Overall, we're a little bit low for everything compared to last year. So Fund 27, really nothing going on in Fund 27 yet. Our main source of revenue is our our categorical aid and our flow-through grants. We really don't start seeing the revenue for flow-through until October, November, when our first claim comes in. And the first categorical aid, spec ed aid payment that we'll get will be in December. And again, with the same as the general fund, the main expenses are salary and benefits in Fund 27, and no surprises there for this month. Questions?
Mr. Como?
I know a couple of years ago, maybe it was even more than a few years ago, we were looking at Medicare reimbursement for certain Fund 27, for Fund 27. And is that still something that is still around? Is that faded out? I just don't hear us talking about it. Maybe we've conquered that issue and...
Yep, I think we've got a good handle on it. There's two different types of Medicaid reimbursement that we get through the year. One is...
Medicaid, I'm sorry, I said Medicare, I think.
Yeah, Medicaid.
Yes, sorry.
We do the same thing.
That was a mistake.
I do that all the time, so. We get what are called school-based services, where these are direct one-on-one claims. It's a claim for service for a specific student. We work with Compass Care to provide that claiming service, and then the district gets the claims. We get the claims are submitted weekly, so we get a regular flow of Medicaid claims throughout the year. Then we have what's called the annual cost, and this is based on a percentage of our overall cost for Medicaid. So we assign different teachers or different staff positions, that work directly with students that fall under the Medicaid umbrella. And we report that on a quarterly basis, what our overall expenditure was for that. And then they look at an IEP ratio at the end of the year, and at the end of the year, we get an annual cost amount from Medicaid. Now I'm going to do it.
Do you have a rough sense of how many students we serve in that capacity?
I would be hesitant to speculate on that. I would be happy to get that information because we
Yeah.
can get that. Let me write that.
I'd like to know roughly how many students we serve in that capacity. That would be good.
Absolutely. Let me get that.
And then I know that we were fortunate enough to come to an agreement with the EAW on base salary agreement, which allowed us to not have a back pay scenario. We avoided a back pay scenario. I'm assuming that was correct, right?
Oh, yeah.
We were able to execute appropriately.
Yep.
And we at least saved you guys a bunch of time.
Payroll greatly appreciated that.
So hopefully we can continue on that for this next year and getting things done so that we can continue to move along efficiently. And I think I had mentioned at the last meeting that I'd like to see if we can start talks earlier this year, and so that we can just have a more efficient process. Glad we were able to avoid those headaches and costs. There's costs associated
Oh,
with
yeah,
it
a
too.
lot of time and energy
So,
goes into that.
I don't know what that would be, but I'm sure it's more than $100.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not asking you to estimate it, so.
I have a question about the interest.
Yes.
What interest are we talking about?
What interest rate right now?
No, like
Or-
what types of things
Yeah,
would
that's-
contribute to that interest?
Good point. I was going to point that out because we're almost half at what our budget
Right,
was.
right.
And that's because of very favorable interest rates right now. It is mainly our interest rate at Waukesha State Bank and at LGIP, the local government investment pool. We keep our funds kind of split between them right now because right now both are returning about 1.03. And so they're right about the same. We watch that as usually one will take a dip or the other, and we transfer back and forth to make the most of our interest. There's no charge for us to do transfers between the two of them. But yeah, we're seeing very favorable interest compared to what we budgeted. I'd be not comfortable changing that budget amount moving forward because you just never know
Right,
what's
no,
going to happen
definitely.
with interest. I think if anything, it'll be a good surprise at the end of the year if it continues to hold.
Great, excellent. All right, anything else on that monthly budget report? All righty, so moving on, we have no discussion items, but we do have a need to go into executive session. For a motion on that, Mr. Como?
I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Parent 1E, for purpose of consideration of offers regarding district property.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is that roll call or roll call?
Ms. Reinacek,
Aye.
Ms. Gomo, or Mr. Gomo,
Aye?
Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All righty, motion carries 3-0. We're in closed session, I guess.